the ships that made the invasions of the people actually, the first ones that went in were the smallest ones because they were the fastest. That was the kind I had.
Did you ever have to participate in any of the invasions?
The invasion of Okinawa.
You did.
It was peaceful. It was peaceful. We were deathly afraid, and we invaded the east coast, and the Japanese were on the south coast. Really.
So nobody was there waiting for you, fortunately?
No, come in. We got every one of my LCVPs were had 230 caliber machine gunners on it, and everything else. We were all prepared to everything. In fact, my crew dry fired, I wouldn't say dry fired, false fired the whole shoreline before we ever got in there. There wasn't a Jap there. So I brought those guys in, and then I brought another crew in, and then I began to take casualties back to the hospital ships. And that went on for a period of, I suppose, maybe 2 weeks. That the major part of my job was taking casualties back and taking replacements in and things like that. We would pull up alongside the APAs, which were big personnel carriers for troops and things, and I would load up 36 troops from them and take them in. That was part of our job. The LST were support vessels, they called us in that respect. But I was lucky.
No, you weren't part of Iwo Jima?
No, thank God.
So basically Saipan and Okinawa were the two biggest ones?
My biggest danger in the war, it occurred in a whole 6-week period at Okinawa. There was quite a few opportunities that to get killed, I would say.
Do you think you went into the war before seeing any combat? Did you sort of have an idealized vision of what it was going to be like, and then after experiencing all of this coming out, I mean, how did that really affect you? Obviously, you get really emotional.
I guess all of us put on a false front. Nobody liked to admit being afraid. And we tried to keep each other confident and cheered up. There was a esprit de corps, I think is really what it is, but there was a knowing that you had men with you and everything that would do their job is satisfying and gratifying in those situations. Trust in your fellow man, and that's what it's all about. Him doing his job and depending on it, knowing that he'll give his life if he has to.
So after Okinawa, you went to Japan as part of the occupation?
Yeah, we were one of the first ships. I brought the first boatload of Marines in and went with them by jeep to Nagasaki.
And then where did you spend the majority of your time in Japan when you were occupying?
I never spent a night on shore in Japan, but we were on the beach toward Nagasaki I was in and out of there, I think probably for maybe a 2-week period, if so. And I don't know. We didn't do any real episodious things. Like I say, we carried a shipload of beer.
Repeat that story.
That story, I tell you, is it's hilarious. People can't believe it would happen on a Navy ship. But it was simply that after we got to Nagasaki, Japan, and our cargo deck or our tank deck which we would carry tanks on ordinarily, was vacant. And the tank deck on an LST is probably 2/3 the size of a football field in length and width. The quartermaster came aboard and he said, "We will be carrying beer." Nobody believed him until the first cargo nets came over and began dropping thousands of cases of beer onto our tank deck. And then we were supposed, well, imagine, I don't know how many thousands and thousands of cases you can put in a football field. The ceiling on an LST or the above to the next deck is probably 18 feet high. So imagine beer stacked 18 feet high and the 2/3 the size of a football field. It was not bottom of the row beer. It was all Carling's Red Cap Ale and things of this nature. We saw this coming in immediately. 150 starved guys, not the officers, of course, began to hide beer in every place it was possible to hide it. And on LST, there are thousands of places to hide beer. After we were loaded, we didn't drink any beer to speak of that much there, but we got to Nagasaki and or Fukuoka, Japan. We pulled up on the beach, and from there on, everybody began drinking, and a friend of mine, Cooley, Charlie Cooley, who lives down in Alabama, said, "Ski," he said, "don't you feel sorry for those poor officers without any beer?" He said, "Look at them." He says, "They can't go down there and get a case of beer." He said, "Let's take some up to them." So he and I carried up 7 cases of beer up to officers' country, and they just disappeared where we took. Never a word was said about it. Well, and Cooley the next day, talking to one of his rebel friends who's an officer, and he said, "Anytime you need any more up here," he says, "just let us know. We'll send up a truckload, you know." Well, every day we made sure our officers had beer too. And so we began, you realize that all good things like this are not going to go without end. So beer was hid in every place that you could hide. Thousands of cases of beer just disappeared. Then we began unloading this for the Army. We throw in 2 extra cases for every truckload they take out, and we had every Army truck that was in the area unloading, and I've got pictures of this, by the way, of all of the LSTs lined up on the beach unloading supplies. But all of the trucks came to LST 1091 because they knew they'd get a couple cases of beer inside their cab. So we were unloaded in 8 hours. As I was telling you before, that night became a comedy. We were tied up on the beach with 2 cables to 2 Army tanks to hold us because there's a 26-foot tide at Fukuoka, Japan. Everybody on the ship is drunk. The tide comes in. The ship parts its lines. We drift out into a mine-filled harbor. Plastic mines, incidentally. We had come in on a channel that was very clearly marked and then put on the shore. And so we ended up floating around this minefield. Everybody, including the skipper, is drunk. Nobody could make anybody believe that we're drifting around in a mine-filled harbor. Everybody was that drunk. Finally, a man who was studying to be a minister was the only man sober on the ship, and he got enough officers to come up and on deck and prove out the fact that we were floating around in the harbor. So this bunch of drunken crew, officers included, gets the engine started. We run the LST right up on the beach, and the next morning the tide goes out. We're sitting up high and dry. everybody's halfway sober. The skipper gets the crew together, and he said, "Guys, we lived through the war." He said, "Let's get back to sea." He said, "I'd appreciate if you'd turn in your beer. We'll get it back to state." I think the guys turned everything in, and maybe except for a couple thousand cases, which we kind of held back to drink on the way to the States. We ended up selling this beer to the Naval Ship Store in Portland, Oregon. I don't know how many thousands of cases we had, but we had one enjoyable week. We rented a place called the Rathskeller. The guys had their wives, girlfriends, and all for a huge party supported by the beer that we stole from the United States Army.
Do you remember what kind of beer it was?
Everything, East Coast beer, but Carling's Red Cap Ale I remember distinctly as being the most popular of all of them. It was unbelievable. If, I'm sure that if word like that ever got to Washington, all of us some way would have been court-martialed. At least the skippers and the officers on that ship would have been drummed out of the service. Nobody ever found out about it. But it's a laughable story every time we get together at our reunions.
So when did you finally leave Japan?
I'm going to say it was probably 4 months after the war was the cessation of the war. 3.5 to 4 months. It took us, because of our slow speed, 37 days to get back to the States. To give you a comparative thing, I met a friend of mine in Japan that told me that they came from the States on their APA in 8 days. But we were LST, we were nicknamed Large Slow Targets, and that's what we were.
Were you part of the did you have to go through the typhoon?
Did we have what?
Did you have to go through the typhoon or the hurricane?
Yeah, I guess I didn't tell you about that, and that's a story in itself. When we were at Okinawa, the biggest typhoon recorded in the Pacific Ocean took place. I have a map of the route that our ship took in attempting to evade this typhoon, and we had at that time quite a bunch of 500-pound bombs on our deck, on our tank deck down below. We spent something like 13 days trying to evade a typhoon that kept finding us. The waves were 70 feet high. Our roll on an LST, supposedly we would turn turtle if we were 37 degrees over. We were over 37 degrees many times, but because of the weight of all of these bombs, we would always recover and come back up. We had ships, a destroyer that we could barely see, went down, completely turned turtle, right off our port bow, probably only 200 yards away during this. We heard radio messages, calls for help that came on for days that you couldn't do anything about. Everybody was concerned with saving their own lives. I thank God for the skipper that we had. Actually, for hours we stood completely still with our bow into the wind. The wind's velocities were 70 miles an hour sometimes, and we actually would stand right still with our engines at flank speed. The danger of turning sideways to the direction of the waves was sure death for us. It would have turned us right over, and I thank God for the good seamanship of the people that were handling the wheel, the skipper, who nobody could sleep, nobody could eat, there was no way you could prepare food, you couldn't make coffee or anything. you couldn't sleep. It was a constant rolling turmoil, like it was being like a fart in a bottle. That you just you have to experience it to completely believe what it was like in something like this. I'm sure that there was, far more. It wasn't published, but I read the recent information. The 612 ships of the United States Navy were either sunk, damaged, or what have you. 612 ships. You're talking about probably an average of 300 men per ship. A lot of people suffered a lot of strain, having lived through the major part of the war and everything. It was a hell of an ending for the guys that didn't make it.
Was this the way did this happen between Okinawa and Japan? This happened before you landed?
No, it happened, we were at Okinawa. We had these bombs on board. Because we had them on board, we were told to get out of the harbor and all, as were many other ships. We went nearly to the Philippine Islands, and if you look at the map, that's a long, long ways, in one great big circle that began eastward from Okinawa and went south nearly as far as the Philippines and back up east or westward again and come back to where originally were about 6 weeks before. It was terrifying, if you want to know the truth. It was more dangerous than any other experience that I had in the entire war. The radio was constantly full of distress signals from other ships, and you felt completely helpless, doing everything you could to save yourself and every seaman's skill that you had. Our small boats that were lashed up in as good a fashion as we could were battered to smithereens. It was everything.
What was your role on the ship? Like, what were you doing?
Well, as a coxswain at that time, I had been promoted to a coxswain. My job was above deck on the ship. One of them, the most dangerous, was the skipper considered it absolutely necessary that we get 2 lines run from our galley area to our forward hatch on each side. Lines that you could hold onto. My crew and myself, I don't know how long it took us, but life jackets on and helping each other, we were able to get some a full 1-inch lines stretched back and forth so that we could get from one end of the ship to the other. We were rolling so bad back and forth that below decks you could get battered just trying to walk. You're liable to get thrown against one wall or the other or anything else. Supposedly, like I said, that you can only stand a 37-degree list. We did everything but stand on our head. You would lean with one hand against the side wall and your legs would be nearly vertical. And every pot, pan, anything that was in any place before was not there. Anything in the galley, in the kitchen, in our storerooms, the stockroom, was piled all over the place. It was a terrifying experience and the most dangerous to us of any experience in the war. I've often said that the typhoon came far closer to killing us than the Japanese. Amazingly, there were so many people involved in it that many guys that I reminisce with about the war were involved in the same typhoon in one sense or another. The ships that were big, cruisers, battleships, carriers, and things like that, did not suffer the great damage. But the poor ships like destroyers, minesweepers, LSTs, LSMs, but for the grace of God, they're terrible.
So, you leave Japan back and start to head home. What are you thinking at this time when you're finally on your way back?
I guess there was an inside happiness that I'm alive. I'm going home. We didn't know how rapidly they were going to discharge us or anything. Everything I dreamed about is going to come true. I'm going to get out of the Navy. I won't have to take orders anymore. What will I do? I think everybody, foremost in their mind was, I'm going to have a good time for a while. A lonesomeness that was going to be cured. I think all of us had a homesickness that they wouldn't admit to until then, you know. It was a feeling of a nearly utopic feeling of happiness, and immediately we got to the States, half the crew was eligible to go home, the other half the crew is at the ship. I flipped coins with the leading bosun mate, and I wanted the opportunity to go home. He begged, boy, ski, honest. I felt so sorry for the guy. He told me how in love he was with his girlfriend and everything else. I said, go. You come back, I'll go. He didn't come back to the ship. He went AWOL. So I ended up going from San Diego up the entire West Coast, helping decommission the ship in Portland, Oregon, and I never did get a leave.
So how long were you doing that?
That was probably a 3-month period.
Wow.
And so the Navy had no way, by the way, of making retribution. The Navy owed me about 45 days of leave time. And you never get paid for that, and you never get to leave when the end of the war happens.
How upset were you at that guy?
I never saw him until 2 years ago at a reunion. And my first question was, is this the girl? He introduced me to this. I said, is this the girl you went home to marry? No. I said, you son of a bitch. And I told him. And I said, and I never got home. He didn't. He says, well, I ended up on a brig. I said, good, you bastard. And he did. He was on a 6-year hitch.
Oh, wow.
And he only had 4 years then. So he went AWOL, and he ended up in a Navy brig and lost his rank, reduced from bosun first class to a coxswain, and he had to do his 2 years. And actually got by without getting a dishonorable discharge. But yeah, that was one of the things I look back and say justice didn't prevail. And
So you decommissioned the ship. Do you know what happened to the ship?